Hello, everybody. So in this video, we are on page 37 of our booklet, and we're talking about natural selection. So if I could put a definition to what natural selection is, it's survival of the fittest. So that first bullet point that you see there. Animals that are most fit for their environment, like have traits or adaptations that are beneficial or advantageous to them to make them survive better than somebody who doesn't have those adaptations, is what survival of the fittest means. If you are the most fit for your environment, you are going to survive, and then you're going to pass those fit traits over to your offspring. Okay, so let's go through some of these bullet points. More individuals are born than can survive. So not the ecosystem can't support necessarily all of the organisms that are born there. So most individuals that are born, or some individuals that are born, do not survive. Resources are limited, so there is like a capacity, a carrying capacity to which certain organisms can survive in an ecosystem. So this puts selective pressures. If you are faster, if you can jump higher, if you can, outrun your enemies, all of those things puts pressure on these organisms in order to be, better adapted to their environment. And those organisms that are better adapted to their environment are going to survive more so than an organism who is not, or an individual who is not. And those surviving individuals that have the beneficial traits are going to pass those traits on to their offspring. So we're going to skip inherent variation. We're going to go right to adaptation. So the better adapted you are to your environment, the higher likelihood your chance of survival is. So if we look at these birds right here, so all of these birds are on the Galapagos Islands. So it's kind of like Hawaii, a bunch of little islands that are pretty close together. But their beaks are different. And their beaks are different because there's different food sources on those islands. So each one of these bird species have adapted to their environment and have, evolved a trait that makes it better for their survival. In this case, we're talking about beaks. So speciation is kind of what I was just talking about when we looked at these birds and their beaks, depending upon what they eat, is gonna dictate how they are going to evolve. So that's what speciation is. So each one of those islands that we talked about, they're all the same species of bird, but there is some variation to them, right? And since they've evolved differently because of the food that's available on that specific island, they have gone through something called speciation. So the birds on island number 1 are only going to mate with birds on island number 1. So as generations go on, that species of bird is going to change and over time become a new species because it's isolated to that island. Last thing we're going to talk about is bottleneck effect. So if I look at these two bottles, right, and I just take a sample out of each one of these, say this whole bottle are deer in a population. Say there's a forest fire where these deer live, and only a handful of those deer survive that forest fire. So what's going to happen is only the deer that survive, so all of these little blue and yellow balls are considered deer. And only the traits that the deer that survive have are going to be passed on to generation after generation. All right, so this is one scenario. Another scenario is what happens if I, pour some of these into a different jar and I get all blue. So the blue traits are the ones that are going to be passed on to the next generation because the yellow ones have died in that forest fire. So it's showing that the frequency of genes is going to change when there's a drastic reduction in population, usually from natural disaster or disease. So this is a good way to look at it because, I'm just taking a small portion of all of these individuals, and only the ones that are left after this natural disaster are going to be able to reproduce. And then those genes are the genes that are going to be passed on for generations to come.